So can you tell us about the minimum effective dose that someone would need for hypertrophy goals, strength goals, and if there's any caveats since you first ran your study on this?
Yeah, for sure. So, very brief background: did my PhD on the minimum effective dose for strength in powerlifters. But in the last few years, I've been involved in some studies on minimum dose training for hypertrophy as well. But obviously, got to be pretty familiar with the literature and have a book coming out. The shameless plug right at the start of the podcast.
No, this is perfect.
There
It's
we go.
content to talk about.
But yeah, in all seriousness, the minimum, based on the current literature, the minimum effective dose for strength appears to be extremely low. We're talking a single set per exercise or per muscle group per week seems to be enough to elicit um, meaningful strength increases. What's interesting is that even when we look at very trained populations like powerlifters, although there's still more research that needs to be done, and we didn't manage to answer every question, we answered a few small questions with some exploratory research and some interview studies. It does seem that just a few heavy sets in the 1 to 5 rep range with a pretty heavy load above 80% of one's one repetition maximum, those few sets per week, per lift per week, per exercise per week, are enough to elicit meaningful increases in strength, even in those who are very proficient in strength, like powerlifters. So, from a strength perspective, things are looking really good for beginners, for trained individuals, and for highly trained individuals. Do something heavy 1 to 5 times per week, ideally somewhere in the 2 to 4 sets per week, just to be safe, and you're going to make tons of strength gains. Interestingly, in the latest meta-analysis on the topic of volume and hypertrophy and strength by Pelland et al., the point where diminishing returns, or like the point where strength gains plateaued, was at around 4 sets per muscle group per week. So you, by doing a handful of sets for a specific movement or muscle group per week, if your goal is strength, you may not only be looking at minimum effective or like meaningful but not maximum gains, but you may actually be looking at near maximal gains. For hypertrophy, the minimum effective dose appears to be somewhere around 4 fractional sets. And by fractional sets, I mean that if you were to do a set of bench press, you'd measure that as half a set for your tricep and a full set for your chest. So again, things are looking pretty good on that front. We recently published a study. Shout out to Tom Herman, who was the lead author, where we looked at very low volume training, single set training. So people doing a single set of each exercise a few times per week, landing them roughly in that 4 to 6 sets per muscle group per week volume ballpark. And even in trained individuals, sets 2 reps away from failure or very close to failure, or to failure actually, were able to elicit meaningful hypertrophy gains, with the tiny caveat being that those that went that went to failure, actually made slightly better gains. But overall, and this is one of those things that people don't really like, everybody hears about, but people don't really allow it to register for some reason, is that you can indeed make amazing gains with low volumes. And especially if you have, a period in your life where you're not able to go to the gym, getting a solid, 30, 40, 50, 60% of your potential gains from just doing less than a handful of sets is still a pretty good deal. The only caveat would be that for hypertrophy specifically, we see that if you want to maximize gains, more volume tends to be better. Now, more volume doesn't mean all the volume in the world for every muscle group simultaneously, but we haven't found that upper ceiling for a single muscle group yet. In practice, that means that around 10 to 20 sets is um, a solid volume range per muscle group per week to be in for somebody who's very serious about their gains and has the time and the recovery capacity to do so. But they could push up to 30 sets for a single muscle group just to, try and maximize their gains. But that's where the illusion of optimal is something that needs to also be addressed. That just because something may be suboptimal, that doesn't mean it equals zero. It may be that you're looking, at 80% gains versus potentially 100% gains. So, yeah, things overall looking great for both untrained and trained individuals.
Well, I think that's an interesting consideration, and a lot of people would be interested in hearing about that, depending on if you're a beginner, if you're like a little bit more intermediate or even advanced, knowing that minimum effective dose does work. And it's funny because in like strength and conditioning, they always talk about how when an athlete is peaking and really in season, they want to focus on their sport specifically and having the time and energy allocation to that sport and away from the weight room. And understandably so, there are some folks in strength sports who don't want to get out of the weight room. And to know that you can still get phenomenal gains and not only maintain, but also get gains from like one or two heavy sets per week, that's amazing to hear. Would you still want to keep someone at that place during their off season? Or would you still want a little more buy-in and say, okay, like let's start inching this up if your goal is potentially a little bit of strength and some hypertrophy?
Yeah, so obviously it would depend on whether that individual is extremely serious about strength gains and hypertrophy gains, but let's assume that they are, or yeah, let's assume that they are. Yes, then I would do whatever I could to push volume a bit higher for hypertrophy. For strength, we can still keep things relatively low and potentially maximize adaptations. Um, but overall, if you have an athlete who needs or an individual who wants to gain more muscle, that's where a well-structured program that allows them to do a bit more volume, and there's ways to cram in more volume via the use of like supersets or drop sets, and have your strength training on top of that. I would try to push volume a bit higher, but not necessarily go from 0 to 100 real quick.
Do you still think that there is going to be also a really wonderful or at least meaningful hypertrophy carryover from doing a strong foundation of strength specific work?
Yeah, for sure. Assuming you're not doing just singles at a proximity to failure at an RIR of, let's say, 4 to 6 reps in reserve. So I said at an RIR and then said reps in reserve again. So just let me give a bit of context here. The relationship between how close you train to failure is different between strength and hypertrophy. So for muscle growth, we see that the closer you go to failure, with some caveats, you don't need to always go to failure, but going closer to failure is better for muscle growth, especially when training with very low volumes, at least based on the current evidence. For strength, we see that you don't necessarily need to train very close to failure to make strength gains. However, if you have an individual who's doing more so traditional strength training, I would most definitely expect that they do make gains in muscle size, maybe not ideal gains, but even if you're at, like, say, 3 to 4 reps in reserve, which they're likely not going to be for every set, you're still growing muscle. It's just, yeah, it's slightly better if you were to go closer to failure, but in most scenarios where people train for strength, they will naturally find themselves having those few sets here and there, either in their accessory work or some back of sets where they do get, in the 1 to 3 reps in reserve range. And that's totally fine for hypertrophy. Because again, if you're doing 4 sets per muscle group per week, even if those are strength sets, assuming you're not doing just heavy singles and you're doing your triples, sets of 4, sets of 5, those of course build muscle as well. So yeah, I would expect any strength oriented athlete to still make gains, which we see in practice all the time.
Yeah, I always loved that conversation of there's not going to be a perfect carryover between both strength and hypertrophy, but they're not also perfectly mutually exclusive. So
Exactly.
someone who is very strong still will look decently muscular. But then you could also have the bodybuilders who are very hypertrophied, but maybe not as strong specific because strength is also a huge neuromuscular adaptation. And I think like that's even important too with respect to strength sports. If your goal is strength, to really hone in on that neuromuscular adaptation away from someone who's just trying to look good in the gym, they can really just kind of pump up. But to hear you can do only a couple sets per week, especially as you had said, at a very heavy time in your life, a very stressed out time, you can still make phenomenal gains insofar as you're going decently close to failure.
Yeah. And a misconception with that as well is that um, somebody looking more jacked may come down to them being leaner, because if we take powerlifting athletes, and I'm not talking about the stereotype of a powerlifter being, morbidly obese and, wearing doing equipped powerlifting and being on PDs, but rather, powerlifters in the, above 200 pounds as a male, or in the not in the super lightweight classes, those individuals might carry the same amount of muscle, if not more in some cases, than individuals who may look more jacked. But the individuals that look more jacked, especially on social media, might look more jacked simply because they are leaner. So that's also a distinction that people need to keep in mind that bodybuilders or individuals who are very interested in how their physique looks are likely to get leaner and also train muscle groups like their side delts or maybe their lats a bit more than power lifters or strength athletes. But a strength athlete, if we were to measure them if we were to DEXA them or whatever, it's very likely that differences, if we account for like stature and body weight, that there wouldn't be big differences in terms of how much muscle they're actually carrying. And that's particularly true for naturals as well.
With body composition in mind, if when we're talking about the minimum effective dose, and it almost seems like day to day, people always say something along the lines of, someone might not be getting in enough calories or energy, so to speak, in order to facilitate muscle growth. Do you
Mm-hmm.
think, in like your own experience with coaching and research, that you see a lot of people who are trying to do maybe the upper ends of hypertrophy building or even strength building, and they're also trying to maintain that lean physique? And if like you're their coach, you're their scientist, and you're saying, hey, like maybe we should eat more, just increase energy availability to promote more anabolism. Like, do people get caught up in both the aesthetics as well as the performance?
Um, from my own experience, I haven't had many clients or seen a ton of individuals with that issue. Yeah, in the niche of maybe natural bodybuilding or like YouTube fitness or whatever, where you need to maintain a lean look year round, I do think it is a concern of people like being afraid of losing definition or gaining a bit of body fat. But at the same time, I do feel, and that's just my 2 cents, right? No actual evidence to back it up, which would be difficult to do because I do think that most people miss out on long-term muscle gains from a consistency standpoint, consistently lifting for years and years and years and consuming enough energy to at least maintain their body weight. Because from the literature, like as it stands, we haven't really understood how whether bulking is actually fully necessary, how beneficial it actually is. Like the waters are pretty muddy, and we mostly have like anecdotes of bodybuilders and almost like a cultural um, phenomenon, which is the phenomenon of bulking. But then if we look closely at the evidence that we have strongly supporting that you need to be in a solid surplus to actually maximize gains, the evidence as it stands is not there. It's a good optimization approach to be in a slight surplus and gain some body weight. But I do feel like many people don't make gains because they have a skewed perception of what how much muscle they can gain, especially those who are advanced, and at the same time they may not be as consistent. But yeah, for sure, there is also that crowd, as you mentioned, that is afraid of eating more and then maybe more or less constantly in a slight deficit, bouncing between maintenance and deficit. And I do think that that may be affecting their long-term gains.
It's interesting that you brought that up, because that idea of it's always back and forth between like everyone knows pretty much at this point that doing something like a dirty bulk or a dreamer bulk is going to be disadvantageous because you're going to put on adipose tissue considerably faster than muscle tissue. But I always thought about this too, as far as like if you have a decent amount of excess body fat, which most people do, could you just eat relatively around maintenance? And even if people aren't tracking their calories, but they say day to day, I'm eating around 1 gram per pound of protein and I'm not going to bed super full. Like I feel fine. I'm not overly hungry, not overly full. If they are truly consistent and progressively overloading, do you think that that's enough to really move the needle, so to speak, over a 5 or 10 year period? Granted, they are being consistent, because like I know personally, like I've never gone into the whole bulk and cut thing, and I've been pretty successful in what I'm doing with respect to progressive overload. But then I kind of question like, well, what if I really try and push the envelope a little bit more and do a traditional bulk and cut? And I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, I do think they would be able to make meaningful gains over a long-term period. And the only argument that I currently have pro bulking, and I would love for it to not be that way. I would love to be able to tell myself, "Yep, let's get obese right now. It will really help make gains." I would like. There's nothing in the world I would love more than being able to go, okay, 7,000 calories a day, baby. We are packing on size. But the only argument pro bulking that, and I'm releasing a video on that in a couple of days, is that for the individual whose hobby is to get jacked, because we're not talking about, individuals who are interested in obtaining the health benefits of resistance training, which you don't need to gain. You don't need to be jacked to be healthy. You just need to lift some weights, be relatively strong, and gain some muscle. But for individuals who have lifting as their hobby and the pursuit of a jacked physique is what gives them some meaning in their life, then it does make some sense. Again, assuming you're comfortable with yourself and your waist circumference is in check, yada yada yada, to uh, place that educated bet on very conservatively gaining some weight, because worst case scenario, okay, in a couple of months you can diet that off, but at best you'll have a bit more energy, and there is a mechanistic rationale for it potentially benefiting muscle growth. So if you're spending all this time and energy and you're focused on, and you care about improving your physique, it's not a bad idea. However, I am also fully pro just maintaining your weight and learning how to do that, because that's a skill in itself, and that's where a lot of people fail. So they bulk cut, and at some point, life gets in the way, and now they're like, okay. Then they go through periods where they gain weight or they fall off the diet wagon. But yeah, maintaining and doing exactly what you're doing now and what I'm doing as well, at least for the last few months, is totally fine. And I think um, we're still looking at some gains. Because, mind you, in many of the studies where we look at hypertrophy, participants, and obviously those studies are not designed to explore recomposition, there is some evidence for recomposition in both untrained and trained lifters where they don't necessarily gain weight and still lose a bit of fat, gain a bit of muscle. But when we look at studies that have participants sort of maintain their weight, and that's in many studies, they're still able to make significant muscle growth gains, at least via ultrasound. And that's another thing that, when you see statistically significant increase in muscle growth, or like, oh yeah, they increase their muscle thickness, that may not necessarily translate to a visually bigger muscle in the naked eye, maybe just an ultrasound image. But anyways, all that to say that we do have evidence of people maintaining their weight and still being able to increase their muscle mass. So I think we are likely fine. Although if you were like, hey, you know what? This is the year where I really care, because it's my new hobby. And for 6 months, I will spend my time lifting, and I care about my chest growing more, eating a bit more, gaining a few pounds, like, 2 to 4 pounds of body weight. Not the end of the world. And it might give you a bit of an edge. It might not, but hey, it's not a bad bet to make.
It's interesting too when you had said, and I think that this is very like person specific, that you were like, hey, if I got news right now that I could just dreamer bulk this thing, 7,000 calories, let's just do it, Lee Priest style, why not? Um, it's funny because like I would hate that. I hate the feeling of being full. I run marathons, I run ultra marathons. I cannot sit still, but I love lifting. And I'm like kicking myself because I run so many marathons and I'm like not gaining mass. And I'm like, well, I spent a lot of time running. And I think that there's something that could be said for like the individual neat. So like the fact that you might not really be able to sit still, whereas other people might just be able to go into like rotting mode and just kind of sit there with their stomach on their gut. And then even something underneath the skin, such as like the amount of inflammation that you would accrue from adipose tissue and having anabolic resistance. Why are you doing like anabolic resistance is bad?
We're freaks, bro. One life, YOLO, anabolic resistance. Let's go. 80 kilos in 6 months. No, I totally agree.
Like, do you think that that would, because I feel like that at a certain point, Jesus, sun is like right in me. I feel like at a certain point, like that could get in people's ways. And I know you've probably had these people talking to you and people have talked to me about this too, of just kind of like, should I bulk? And from like a complete health perspective, maybe this individual should eat more nutrient dense foods, should do a little bit more cardio and focus on recomping just to be healthy and even happier. And I think about that inflammatory piece, that those are going to be competing pathways within the body.
Mm-hmm.
You look at like AMPK and mTOR, those two things aren't friends. If you want to put
Yeah.
on the muscle mass, you also have to be healthy in order to have that on your body.
Yeah. No, I agree in the sense that, like, obviously, if If we found out that bulking to an extreme extent was beneficial for muscle growth, then that would obviously have implications for everything else that you said, which means that physiology would be different. So it would be like, oh, okay, it turns out that if you're active and lifting a shit ton and eating a lot, there's a different process, so inflammation is not as high. That's why you're able to gain more muscle, but that's not the reality. Um, However, we do see, and there's a very interesting article series on Stronger by Science on P ratio, the idea of leaner individuals being able to gain more muscle mass than individuals higher in body fat, and in practice, we don't see that being the case. Like even fatter individuals are able to still gain as much muscle. However, if we get off the La La Land train or the train to La La Land where we're able to bulk and gain, pounds and pounds every week, and we come back to reality, the one's relationship with food and one's body composition is much more than just, hey, how much muscle are you going to pack? Because then if we look at visceral adiposity and health implications of gaining more body fat, even if we assume that you are genetically blessed, like I was, and physically active, where even at a 300 pounds body weight at 5'10", I had perfect cholesterol, perfect blood pressure, heart rate in the low 50s, high 40s, and my visceral fat was slightly above the cutoff point, but it wasn't anything crazy because I was still walking and lifting and genetically blessed, whatever. Even at that stage, you are increasing your risk long term of bad things happening to you, and obviously your relationship with food, if you've developed that sort of binge or eat everything inside relationship with food and gained a bunch of weight, it might be much, much more difficult to undo that because, yes, on paper, it's a calorie deficit for some time, but that's not what we see in practice. People struggle with weight loss and maintaining weight loss in most of the trials that we see. Like losing weight and keeping the weight off is very difficult. And obesity is not as simple as eat less, and it's multifactorial. So, yeah, there's a ton of implications, and there's not really a good argument, unfortunately, for YOLO bulking. I would love if there was, but as it stands, even myself, the person who's most biased to telling you YOLO bulk, tells you do not do it. It's a bad idea unless you are absolutely skinny, coming off of, I don't know, you're sick in bed for a year and you've lost tons of weight and now you classify as, too too thin or, whatever. But even then, this is not medical advice. Don't sue us. Whatever. I'm trying to be open-minded here and inclusive. It's
You were
legal advice though.
you were 300 pounds.
Yeah, at 21, baby.
Were you
YOLO
doing
bulk.
like powerlifting or like wrestling or
Yeah,
something?
it was a time in my life, undergraduate year at uni. I came in at Southampton at 200 pounds. And over the course of a few years, eating everything in sight, being very physically active, and squatting a lot. That was my thing back then. I really enjoyed squatting, and gaining weight was helping my squat. Um, but it did help me psychologically to address body dysmorphia a bit because I did look like a little dobo at some point, and being comfortable with looking like that, I was actually more comfortable when I was fatter versus when I was thinner when I was younger, where you're constantly looking at yourself and thinking, am I too lean? Am I not too lean? Am I too small? Am I big enough? But yeah, it was for a very short period of time of like a few months, and then over the course of 2 years, I lost about 80 pounds, and then gained a bit more, and then eventually did a big cut this summer.
So where was the initial starting point and the ending point now? I think you put on Instagram the other day you're like 190.
196, which is
You
crazy to say.
and the abs are good. So you're very
Thank you.
lean right now. What was the starting point? You got up to around 300. Now you're like almost 200.
Yeah.
What was that bounce? And do you, I know, going back to that caloric energy, surplus, do you think that that really did help you move the bar, move the needle more so than someone who would have tried to, main gain or maintain, so to speak?
I don't think it did. I think it did more from hey, fun years sort of standpoint psychologically, because gaining a bunch of weight for just this, a year or two when you are 20 and you're also, I wasn't driving, so we were walking. Like I've been averaging 12 10 to 12K steps for a while, and I was doing even more walking back then, plus lifting, plus still eating, a bunch of whole foods every day for whatever that's worth. Um, I think it was mostly a psychological boost that, it was fun being able to come back from the gym and be like, okay, pizza, blueberries, and peanut butter now. YOLO. But from a muscle growth standpoint, no. If I could go back, I wouldn't change anything because I'm happy with how things went. But if, let's say, I could go back and change something for whatever reason, I wouldn't have done that because I came to Southampton here in the UK pretty lean, not leaner than I am now, but I would have just main gained, gained 10 pounds over a year, lost a bit, then done that again, and sort of spend my uni days doing that and building certain habits that I built later on versus because what happened was I came YOLO for like 4 months, then lost all the weight I gained, then slowly went up, then cut a bit, then slowly went up a bit more, then cut a bit, then went up quite a bit, then cut for 2 years. And at the same time, I was doing mostly strength training, so lower volume training, wasn't doing a lot of direct arm work. Anyways, that's my life story now, so I'll stop.
No, I mean it's interesting, and it's funny because I like there's like no shortage of high school and college kids who can very much get a huge anabolic stimulus by just eating complete garbage and even training like garbage. And you see it like they're all on their phones in the gym and they're just standing around like watching each other fail on the bench press, but then like nothing bad happens. They just like keep going and
Mm.
laugh it off and just then eat garbage. And maybe they have some pre-workout or a protein shake, whatever, and then they make phenomenal gains. And then maybe at the age of 25, they go, oh, something feels funny. I'm getting a little bit of like a disc issue, or my joints are hurting, or oh, I'm getting a little on the heavier side, or I get tired in the middle of the day. That was my thing when I hit 25, and I was like, oh, I gotta actually have to look at the way I eat and train now.
Mm. No, I feel that, and if anyone of that age group is listening, you're significantly lowering your risk for failure in the future by not doing those things. Obviously, you can do them and learn from doing them, but then you have to undo them because. But there's also a chance that life gets in the way and you don't undo them. And just because I happen to manage, doesn't mean that everybody else will, you know, lose the weight or care about lifting after a while, because lifting was always my thing. Even in those years, it was all about lifting, training every day, lifting hard, squatting multiple times per week, blah blah blah. But for a lot of people, they may do the YOLO bulk for a year and then lose a bit of weight, but then first job or family or other obligations, and then all of a sudden they're in this weird space where their love for lifting has left the building. They're still a bit, fatter than they need to be for health reasons, and then all of a sudden, 10 years have passed. Now you have issues with your blood pressure or your cholesterol, and you're not somebody who fell in love with lifting and just happened to also dream or bulk.
Do you still squat a whole lot? And if you do, have you changed the way that you do that with respect to what you know now, probably with like stimulus to fatigue ratio and even axial loading and causing undue fatigue?
Not really. I mostly deadlift at the moment. So deadlift is became squat was my big love, but after I hit nearly 600 pounds, so 595, unfortunately, um, and after a period where I was squatting multiple times per week and the bar was pretty heavy, it became psychologically draining because a heavy squat session is different to a heavy bench or deadlift session. It's different getting under that bar for me at least, and having it be my thing and being a bit ADHD about things, I then started doing other lifts, and then the deadlift became my big love. So that's what I've been doing for the past few years. I still train my legs, but I don't do the barbell squat. I did a few. I was able to squat. No, I did some back squatting last year, but nothing too crazy.
You never had any issues with injuries, back pain, knee pain? Your biomechanics are pretty good.
I've had the odd lower back flare up here and there, but I am what some people call a movement optimist. I don't read too much into things, and given that I don't power lift, I'm not required to deadlift every week. So I actually came back from a slight injury the past 3 months where I did something. Obviously, it's so multifactorial that I cannot pin it down. And my back was hurting when I was deadlifting above a certain load, so above like 440. So I simply worked around it, didn't lift heavy for a few weeks, still trained the musculature through other movements, and then it went away. But yeah, it's been pretty fine. I When I was fatter, my leverages were pretty good for squatting. They're still fine now, but yeah, nothing too crazy. I try to not read into that stuff too much, and I do feel like a lot of people who do experience injuries often those might be as a result of them overdoing it rather than some biomechanical inefficiency or some structural issue. That's my opinion, though.
But are you, because you're a scientist, do you tend more towards the side of the minimum effective volume? Or for you personally, do you also like, does your, I know for me, like personally, my ego can get in the way and I'm like, oh, I'm going to do 20 sets. And it's like, okay, like let's back off from this.
For muscle growth, I at the moment, I if I can train every day, I train every day. So like I'll do sets on sets on sets because I'm like, whatever, worst case scenario, I exercised. It still doesn't end up being that much. And keep in mind that when you're doing things like pull-ups, dips, any sort of upper body movement, it's fine. There's no actual loading. Now, like my elbow, for example, is bothering me a bit because I've been doing pushing and pulling exercise for like 5 days in a row. But for things like deadlifts, for anything strength related, I've been literally doing a single and maybe another set for my deadlift for the past years. That's all I've been doing. Heavy single, including the warm ups, maybe a couple of back off sets, and that's been that. And it's worked fine.
No, it's great. I think that's really phenomenal advice when we talk about that idea of longevity
Exactly.
of do you want to continue doing something that you love for the long haul? And
Mm,
that's not something that, like I was talking with do you know Dean St. Mart?
I think so.
I was talking with him a
Right?
couple weeks ago. Brilliant guy, like a PED researcher, and he's all about like science. He's got like a PhD in organic chemistry. The guy's brilliant, and he was talking about bodybuilders needing an exit strategy from competing competitively.
Yeah.
And I love the way that he spun that of just you can continue to lift, you can continue to make your meals, get your steps in, pose in the mirror and look and feel great. He goes, you can do that. He goes, but you don't have to take it to this nth degree with like these PEDs or whatever else you may or may not be doing. And I love that idea too with respect to lifting weights. And that's why I was kind of like asking you that question of can you stay like around the same body weight and just focus on progressive overload in the gym, mesocycle to mesocycle, and over the course of 5, 10, 15, 20, hey, maybe 30, 40 years, you look back and you go, wow, like I'm so much stronger. My joints are still intact, and I love the way that I look and feel versus if I burnt out way too early from injuries and too many dreamer
Yeah.
bulks.
Yeah. No, that's where I'm at now. But like I don't care if I hit many PRs. Because I will reframe. You can always reframe what a PR is. I can start a new exercise. I'm now doing weighted dips. I've never done weighted dips. I'll hit some new PRs there. I am very happy with my physique, and I legitimately do not care if I gain any more muscle, as long as I can maintain the physique that I have now. Even if I atrophy a bit as I get older, I don't care. I've reached the point where, for my standards at least, I feel and look jacked and I feel healthy. And it's all about the love of lifting. I enjoy the act of lifting. I enjoy being in the gym and having my thing, which is lifting weights. Obviously, some PRs here and there are cool if they come about, but for the majority of people out there, as long as you're training close to failure and your intensity of effort is relatively high, even if you have weeks or months where you're not doing as much and you're doing 2 sessions a week, you're still gonna, at the very 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 worst, maintain your gains, if not make more gains. So it's all about reframing that. Well, as you said, like, still pay attention to your nutrition, not because you're trying to optimize your physique, but eat fiber, eat mostly whole foods, eat protein. But even then, even with protein, like, you don't need to take it to be crazy about it. Just make sure that you're including some protein source with every meal. Even if you don't do here and there, it's not the end of the world. Where most people fail is that they don't have that inherent love for lifting. and then they stop lifting. I don't think you can find many people who've been lifting for life, even if that's going from hardcore bodybuilding workouts to mostly like bodyweight stuff at home, again, close to failure, and don't maintain a very muscular physique by any people's standards. So, and that's the problem with PEDs as well, especially with young people getting into PEDs. Because aside from the health potential health risks comes also the body dysmorphia and the cultural aspect of it, as well as you've now seen yourself make this amazing progress, and now you identify as the huge cartoon looking guy, or like absurdly jacked or absurdly shredded guy, and at some point you will have to give that up, to an extent, or spend your whole life revolving around it, and that's where things can get crazy. And you see some bodybuilders who look like superheroes, and they don't feel that way. They feel like they look flat. I get that if you're a competitive bodybuilder, and obviously, like the same way a football player would tell you, I need to get better because I'm competing at the highest level. But there comes a point where you got to leave that behind and adjust your standards and your expectations.
Yeah, there's a guy I know who goes to the same gym as me, and he'll do a cycle for like 6 or 8 weeks, and then he'll get off for like a couple months, and then get back on again and get off for a couple months. And the conversations completely change. It's like when I'm talking with him and he's on something, he's like, "Oh, I feel great, pumping up." He's like looking at himself in the mirror, always wearing like a tank top and whatever. And then when he's off it, he's just like he feels terrible. And I was like,
Yeah.
why don't like? And I know it's like a stupid, cliche thing to say, but I'm like, why don't you just get in the gym and have fun and do the best you can every single day of the week, and make these little marginal gains and have fun with it, and know like you could potentially do this for life.
Exactly. Especially if you not many people, if like the majority of people are not getting paid for their physiques. And you can absolutely, obviously, okay, genetics are a thing as well, but you can absolutely have an impressive natty physique for the majority of the population, and you can be pretty strong as well. Like we exist in echo chambers, and I've had that experience. I was doing a seminar in Greece with a couple of friends who are also like, many of my friends are pretty strong and pretty muscular, at least for natural standards. So in our circle is like, okay, obviously everybody deadlifts 5 plates. So I was like, everyone here can deadlift 4 or 5, right? And everybody was like, no, of course not. And I was like, oh, like once you exit the echo chamber, because like on our feeds, I'm sure with your marathon stuff, you're like, of course everybody can run a 5K, but like once you exit the echo chamber, you're like, okay, the average person will look at a Jason Statham physique and be like, whoa, beast, that guy looks like a freak. Not everybody thinks the way we do for our hobbies. The same goes with cars, with anything. So it's important to adjust your standards, not lower your standards necessarily, but if you're constantly in pursuit of the next level adaptation, the reality is that when we look at longitudinal data for strength in powerlifters, there comes a point where you plateau. Even the powerlifter who spends their entire training focused on 3 exercises, they won't gain any more strength. If you're a natural, at some point you're not making more gains. You're not going to get bigger biceps to the point where you're now flexing your arms and people are like, wow, those arms. Yeah, you can maybe increase their size a bit to the point where you can see differences, but you have to be okay with that, and then just enjoy lifting for the love of it, and then reframe your goals. And it's a fun hobby. Okay, start doing different exercises. Train that one muscle group you haven't trained. At some point, I might be like, oh, let me blast my legs now for a year, see how big they can get, or my calves, or whatever. But I don't really care. And I think that's where most people should be. Obviously, check my privilege. I do feel like I am relatively genetically blessed, both from a strength and muscle growth perspective. But even if you're not, that's not something you can change. So even if you happen to be, naturally skinny or whatever, build as much muscle as you can, get comfortable with the idea that that's where you're going, and then it's all fun and games, and then you're at the promised land.
Are you ever having to step outside of your echo chamber and take stock? And like the example I'm going to give is we've all taken off time from the gym or doing something we love, and you have a little bit of time and you're just like, hey, like I cannot wait to get back in. Maybe you're on vacation and like you're in your phone and you're going to start writing out a program on like the notes app and like, yeah, I'm going to do this and this and this, and you're itching to get back in. And as you creep toward the end of your mesocycle, maybe 3, 4, 5, maybe even 6 weeks in, maybe some joint pain, maybe some systemic fatigue, and you leave the gym frustrated, even though you did all your sets, you did all your reps, and by any standard, you're healthy. You got in there, and maybe you listen to a podcast while you're at the gym. Do you ever have to come back out and say, hey, like, I had the opportunity to lift 5 days a week, even if it wasn't perfect? I'm really happy about that. Like, for example, I just took off the last 3 days because I was like really busy. I ran a marathon over the weekend, and now I'm really excited to go to the gym tonight. And I didn't feel that way last week. I felt burnt out. So, do you have to remind yourself that?
Um, Not really. Wait a sec. Not really, because I'm at a stage where I legitimately don't care anymore. Like, in a good way. I train using our app, MyAdapt, which plan you can adjust your workout on the fly. You can change. Let's say you want to be in the gym for 30 minutes, you can do that. Anyways, my training is very flexible. I don't have a specific mesocycle or specific goals. I do exercises that I love. If an exercise feels some sort of way, I'll skip it. I'll change it. And even if I have a workout where I'm not getting a pump, performance is a bit meh, I I still leave the gym thinking, oh, okay, not the best workout today. Still went, still lifted, still stimulated some muscle growth. And at the end of the day, I still exercised. So that has helped massively, because I remember when I was powerlifting, or at least like focusing more on the numbers, because I was never like a good powerlifter or like really into powerlifting. Bad training week, boy, that was a rough time, because all of a sudden then your identity is in shambles, and you're like, why? And as you said, you may be perfectly, why did I have a bad session? Aren't things moving? So being able to focus mostly on muscle growth training, which is pretty straightforward. Did you go close to failure? Yeah. Whether you lifted a bit more or a bit less than last week doesn't really matter. And reframing the gym as I think we enjoy doing, I think that we are blessed to do, and an activity that also benefits our health and our overall well-being from a psychological standpoint as well, allows has allowed me to not have necessarily bad sessions in terms of leaving the gym. I Even if my performance dips massively, sometimes I don't even remember like the exact numbers until I log them back in, and I'm like, oh, okay, low PR, less than last week. It's not a big deal. Does that make sense?
No, it makes perfect sense. And I think that I've never put that sort of relationship together for myself, but I've logged every one of my sets and reps for I think 10 or 12 years, and never once have I ever looked back on the numbers.
Oh, nice.
I don't know
Respect.
why. It's just like I love data. I'm a fellow scientist, and I just like I log everything because I feel like I have to, and it's like in my phone, and then I'll upload it, but I never look back on it, and then like I'm always like really proud and thankful that I got to lift weights and I'm healthy, and I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. And even with like all of these like races back here, I besides one of them, I can tell you one of the race finishing times out of like 80 something races, and I'm like, otherwise, I had a really fun time because I did my best. And it's like the
Nice.
most kind of like lame cliche thing, but I'm like, no, it's all good.
If you're not doing it, like if it's not at all, because at the end of the day, like if it's your hobby and it's something you enjoy, sure, you want to improve. And keep in mind, I'm sure you've hit many PRs over those years, and you understand when you grow as a lifter, and in your case as an athlete, you understand that if you are taking your hobby seriously and you're putting in the work, there will be PRs along the way. And obviously, because you're geeking out about it, you'll adjust things here and there. But obsessing over the numbers, or specifically performance, when you also have a life outside of it, and when there's no, financial incentive for you to break the your previous marathon record, or hit, do an extra rep on chin-ups, it's it doesn't make much sense to overly obsess about it. Keep in mind, I get that a bit of fun, the fun of the hobby is to make progress, but I do feel that once you remove that mental stress or that mental pressure, those PRs will come. So for everyone listening, don't take it as, oh, I go to the gym and my performance has been regressing for 3 years and I don't care. But the fact that I don't really obsess about it allows me to still push myself hard, and then those PRs come naturally. I lost um, 60 pounds now, and I'm able to lift more or less the same in most lifts, and have hit all-time PRs without any meticulous planning or any overthinking, simply by showing up, doing what I love, putting some effort in, and not overthinking it, because you don't need to.
That's the like the don't put all your eggs in one basket approach, and it sounds like it's very much working, and it works for a lot of people too. I was gonna I was interested in getting your take on, as someone who does research, if you had the opportunity to do really any sort of line of studies, maybe it's cross sectional, maybe it's longitudinal, what are some unanswered questions that you have continued to have over the years?
Yeah, bulking would be one for sure. Very difficult study to run. Um, and in a world where the funny thing is that if we got like a multimillionaire who's interested in lifting and was happy to give us a bit of money, it wouldn't take that much money to run a few year-long studies to answer some very very basic questions that we haven't answered. Maybe I'm wrong here, right? Don't quote me. Maybe it does require more money than I'm thinking. Okay, relax. But if there's a multimillionaire out there interested, please reach out. Bulking would be one. Like actually having people, a lot of people, a good amount of people, um, do a conservative and a more aggressive bulk versus maintaining over a long period of time with strict dietary control. Now I've gone into La La Land, like I'm on the high street of La La Land now, because in order to do that, like you'd need people to actually either get their food delivered or like to have proper dietary control over participants. It takes a lot of effort. But yeah, a bulking study would be dope to finally have like a 6 month study where we have individuals actually consume more calories than they need, and we measure a bunch of muscle groups, and we even have people perform more volume and see how that scales with the surplus, whether that affects whether the surplus is more beneficial if you do more. Like so many things to look into, but a proper bulking study would be a nice first step. The other study I'd love to, excuse me, I'd love to eventually do or to see would be a long-term volume study where we have individuals, and that could be a within subject study. I mean, we can get creative with the design, but a study with a lot of people, again, over a long period of time, where we see whether higher volumes are more beneficial in the short term or in the long term. That would be cool to see whether, okay, maybe high volumes do result in greater growth in short periods of times, and that plateaus quicker, but low volumes you know eventually lead to the same road, just it just takes longer. um and another cool study, let me quickly think. I would love to see some more studies on powerlifters and powerlifting accessory exercises. That's just me being me. And also see whether minimum effective dose type training at a many reps away from failure, whether that's also able to elicit substantial increases in strength. Keep in mind, if there was a bit more money in research and labs were collaborating, some of those studies could be possible, um, but they're not. And another study that maybe we get to do at some point in the future that is a bit more realistic is to finally develop an evidence based visual scale for body fat estimation. Because as it stands, all we have are some charts that people on the internet have made up. But it would be cool to get, 100 or a few hundred people measure their body fat with the use of technology, and the maybe have also some experienced bodybuilding coaches comment on like common traits that you'd look out for every single percentage or whatever. Anyways, have like a solid visual guide for different body fat distribution types, like android and gynoid. Have a front, rear, for both the upper and the lower body view of what different body fat percentages look like, and have an actual visual guide that people can refer to when they're trying to estimate their body fat versus, you know, relying on what we have at the moment.
I feel like with the visual body fat percentage, that's probably not going to be too far away. Because like there's even, I mean, with AI right now, and even like, scanning your food or whatever it is, and you could even just type in like, oh, like just get Ben Franklin dunking a basketball and it looks perfect. And of course, I mean, that's like it takes all the images that we have of like Ben Franklin and just anyone dunking a basketball. But I feel like that could be something that might be in our near future to have. And that'd be really
Yeah,
interesting because those things, I don't know why, but those bother me so much. Whenever I see like on the internet, like I'm another one who like falls for that. I was like, oh, like what's single digit body fat percentage look like? And what's it look like here? What's it look like here? And for anyone who understands like body compartments and where we hold on to fat, it can be completely different person to person. And I always
exactly.
hate to see like this and that, this and that. And it's like you can see someone with a very lean face or very shredded arms, but they have a little bit of a gut, and you go, wait, what's off here? Or someone who has like great abs, but they have like they hold more weight in their lower back or whatever it might be. So I think that could happen for sure.
Yeah, that wouldn't have too many implications in terms of like at the end of the day, who cares about what body fat percentage you are? But it would be cool to actually have a scale that people can use instead of falling in the trap of going for multi, like, buying scales or going for DEXAs, and they can just go, oh, this scale is more or less accurate. This is my body type. Okay, these are some descriptors that fall in this body fat category. If I take five or more boxes, I'm likely somewhere there in that range. Cool. Happy days. But yeah, I fully agree with you because at the moment we have like it's these ridiculous charts which are upper body only and random pictures just copy pasted from throughout the net. People on PDs, different lighting, different skin tones, and it's like we don't even see their lower body or their back. You're just seeing a picture that could be somebody who prepped for a photo shoot under the best light ever versus some guy standing there at a clinic who dexed them. Anyways, yapping too much.
No, I think these are all good considerations. What are you working on right now? You said you have a book coming out.
Yeah, there's a book on minimum effective dose training for muscular development. So that includes hypertrophy and strength. It's essentially one page that says, "Hey, just do something," and me a thumbs up, and then a bunch of pictures of me posing at various body weights. No, just kidding. It's a book that covers all the basics as it pertains to resistance training, some very basic things about nutrition, recovery, and the concept of the minimum effective dose. Because I wanted to be able to refer people to a resource that can cover all their bases, and it can be like a standalone book that they can buy, and then they can buy into the concept of the minimum effective dose, the pros, the cons, see how they can actually structure a program besides the general recommendation of, hey, just do something. Because it does seem that some people are very receptive to that, the when you tell them, hey, just do a few sets per week. And there are many people out there that don't, like, they need a bit more of a push. So having that complete resource, I feel, can help people. Obviously, we'll see when the book comes out.
No, it sounds exciting. I'm excited to follow along with that project. Where can people find you and everything you're doing?
They can find me on YouTube at Dr. Pack, same on Instagram. And from there are my links to ResearchGate and every other platform where we have our research.
Oh, this has been brilliant. Thank you so much for coming on today. And I know it's getting late where you are, so
Thank you.
finish this off. But thank you.
Appreciate it.